So Tom, we're talking today about your music for Black Mass, which stars Johnny Depp as the notorious Boston killer James Whitey Bulger. How did this film come to you? Was there something that director Scott Cooper had liked about your earlier music, maybe, that led to you being hired?
I think what happened is, like, they waited for quite a long time to get a composer in, and I think when I talked to Scott about this, he was saying that he really liked the daring approach that I was taking for Mad Max, and he wanted to talk to me. And he said to me, "Don't get me wrong. I don't want a Mad Max score in this movie, but I like the oddball approach that you took to certain things. I would really want you to see my film and tell me what you think needs to be done for this film." So that's pretty much how it started.
How early were you hired? Was there plenty of time to figure out the musical approach you needed?
I started pretty much 6 weeks before the end of the 6 weeks before the deadline of the film.
That's fairly late.
That's fairly late, yeah.
What kind of discussions did you have with Scott? You know, as somebody who had filmed a music drama like Crazy Heart, did he have specific ideas?
It was very funny because the first time we got together, it was a meeting that I had with him and with the producer, John Lasher, and I saw the film in a small theater on the lot. And it was 9 o'clock in the morning, I believe, when I saw the film. And I came out of it at 11, 2 hours and 9 minutes later, and my hands were just wet, and I was shaking, and I felt very, very, very uncomfortable. And the movie had a massive impact on me. And so 5 minutes after that, I sit in a room with Scott, and Scott said, "So what do you think?" And I said, "Oh man, like, it's can I get back to you in the end of the afternoon?" And so we just talked maybe 20 or 30 seconds. It had such an impact on me. Like, I had to come down for a second. And then later that day we talked, and I said, there's so much stuff I'd love to ask you and talk to you about, but I have this idea and I'd like to work on something, and I'd like to send it to you. And then if you recognize your movie in that, I would really love to work with you and do the score for this movie. And he said, "Well, that's an interesting approach, but yeah, if you want to do that, be my guest." And I locked myself up in the garage, and I got really inspired, and I worked for 6-7 days straight, and I thought I was gonna write just a theme for Whitey Bulger, but then it ended up being this 45-minute piece of music that went through all these different moods, and I sent it to him, and he was really floored that there was so much music to listen to. And then on Monday morning, they played that whole piece of music in surround on the dubbing stage because they were prepping a preview, and they all listened to it. And Scott called me back saying, like, "Yes, I do recognize my movie in this, and I really want you to start on this film." So that's how we started, actually.
So when you sat down to sort of begin working on this suite, were you after a certain sound palette or a certain mood, or did you sort of just experiment and see what worked?
No, I actually did that day that I came home. I started thinking about this. What do I want to do, and how much restraint is there going to be, and how much are we going to go over the top? And so I thought about all these things, and I thought, if all these elements were touched on in this piece of music, you could consider it a proper journey. You could almost see it as a journey through the film. So I really started analyzing, how should I start? How should I go somewhere else? What do I want to do with the harmony? What do I want to do with the melody? And I started analyzing what I thought the characters were. And then in that week, I did talk to Scott, and I wouldn't say what I was working on, but I would say, regarding Connolly, so when this and this happens to him, what's your translation as a director to his composer? What is that person going through? What should be my musical equivalent of that, without asking him music questions? And so what constantly came back was, this is a movie about humans that are capable of very, very terrible things. and not a movie about criminals that happen to be humans. So he was very, very clear on that. So it was very important for me to humanize these characters and to make sure that you feel that connection with these characters on screen. So therefore, I picked a palette of instruments, and I know he's a big fan of cello. So I knew that cello was going to be an important instrument. And then I wanted to use the piano, and I wanted to use some very uncomfortable overtones of strings and things like that as my sound palette. Not too much detailed. And then as I was going, I started recording piano phrases with sticks and with mallets, and so that became a palette on its own. And then I started experimenting with sound design. Sound design is always a very important part of my scores, and the sound design that I do is always derived from acoustic recordings or acoustic instruments. And I picked the instruments that I was going to use for the score and just do sound design on that. I rarely do sound design on sounds that are derived from an electronic source, usually from an organic source. So no matter how crazy you go with the sound design, there's always that hint of like, but that doesn't sound like a piano, or that idea is enough. And so that became the palette. And one of the things I did was creating, I have this tape delay, and I sat behind this piano, and I stuck one microphone in, not trying to record a high level quality recording, but just stick a microphone in there, and that microphone went into a tape delay, and the output of the tape delay went into a small pocket recorder that I always have around the house. If I have an idea, just quickly record it. And I was sitting behind the piano, and I had the delay set to slow, but on a very long repeat. So if you would play one note, bing, 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 like that. And I started to play all these phrases that would go into the tape delay, and it would be phrase on top of phrase on top of phrase. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I would record that in. And I made 80 or 90 of those really weird phrases that were not quite in time. The piano is out of tune. And it had a really macabre atmosphere. So that became a very important part in that piece of music too.
You wrote themes for, especially for the two really main characters.
Yes.
I mean, can you talk a little bit about why that was necessary and what the themes were and how they're different?
Well, there are two themes. One is the theme for Whitey Bulger, and one theme is for Connolly, the FBI agent. And all other characters, all other situations are somewhat sprinkled down versions of those two main themes. So the Winter Hill Gang, that is led by Whitey Bulger, have elements of Whitey's theme, so it sprinkles down to all their members. Not as clearly and not as rudimentally stated when we see Whitey. And the same goes for Connolly. So the FBI, the people that work with him, if there's an FBI situation, they get sprinkled love from that Connolly theme. Connolly is a melody that the reason why it is the way it is that he wants to go higher, he wants to grow, and then I'll give it a little note, but then I'll pull the melody back down because he's never getting there, and he's digging this hole for himself. And I wasn't necessarily very selective with who got a specific instrument. So the theme for Whitey is played and on the piano, but it's also played on the cello. And the theme for Connolly is played primarily on the cello, but it's also played by some treated pianos that I just talked about. So they use each other's instruments too, which also emphasize the idea that these characters, they have something in common, not only from the past when they were playing on the playground and Connolly got beaten up by this guy and Jimmy saved him at that specific point. But then also later on when they make that Unholy Alliance and they walk through this funnel fugue, to go till the end, and there's no way out. So it was very important that these were not distinct themes, distinct instrumentation, like they were not connected to one another. They had to be connected right from the start. And that would also create an atmosphere when Connolly does show up at the dock to make that deal with Billy, that we didn't feel like, so how come are these guys now just making a deal just like that in 2 minutes? No, these guys grew up together. They knew each other. So that was an important aspect.
Talk a little bit about the use of the cello. I thought that it was it could be poignant, it could be especially almost elegiac at times. Talk a little bit about the use of the cello and the string orchestra, which at times becomes very powerful in the film.
Yeah, well, it was extremely important for me that the strings and the cello would be done in the right way. And I also wanted to make sure that whatever I wrote for the cello and the violins was written in the right way. So it made the most amount of sense to get together with a wonderful cellist, Steve Ardoti, and one of the first violinists in the LA Film Orchestra, Bruce Dukoff. So we were here together with Peter Rutter, the contractor, and we had 2 bottles of really good wine and Italian snacks, and I played them the movie, and I played them what I had written for the movie. And we went through the score and they advised me on things. They said, oh, we can probably, I would maybe change this. We talked about the setting of the strings, how many strings, where we should position certain string players because they had to play those really eerie harmonics while there were other counterlines going on. So I really benefited from that 6-hour session on Friday night, and I took all that in, and then I incorporate that all in the score, and then I had a separate session on forehand with Steve Ardoti to really try these things out, and it was like really magical how it worked out, and it was almost like a rehearsal to the scoring session. And then once we got to the scoring session, it sounded really good, and he was very familiar with the lines, and he could really put some personality in, which he did. I mean, it's a really wonderful player, and the knowledge of Bruce, what to do with the players, how many bass players, how many cellos, how many people, on this line, how many people on that line. It was like when we were done recording, you pulled up the 3 main microphones, and it sounded fantastic, like all in balance.
How big was the orchestra?
It's pretty big, 73 strings, which is quite a lot. And then we had some wonderful woodwind players. We had bassoon, bass clarinet, and 1 English horn, and that is almost like the choral glue in between all these individual string lines, and the sound of it in the room was really, really, really nice and really special.
When I'm hearing the piano, am I hearing you play?
Yes, and I'm not a great piano player, but if I play a phrase often enough, not only can I play it at that point, but I can also put that personality in that I need for a character. But if a line is that simple as this, I can easily do it. But if it gets more complicated, and that's the beauty of writing with computers, or for other composers with staff paper and a pencil, because it all takes place in the brain. It has nothing to do with your fingers. And yes, I do play a little bit of piano, I play drums and bass and guitar, but I would never sit down and write a piece of music that's limited, but with what I can play. It needs to all come from the head.
I understand there's pipe organ in the score too. Can you talk a little bit about why that is and how you used it?
Well, the bond that these people create in the movie together, and Scott calls it the Unholy Alliance, but there's something spiritual about it, and that majestic belief in brotherhood, blood, and loyalty. And that's what Connolly really, really is, and that's what the criminals really are in the beginning of the movie towards Johnny as their leader. And there are all these rules. If you're a rat or if you're an informant, you should be cut up and put in a plastic bag and just dumped in a river. So that code that they all have together, and then between Connolly and Whitey Bulger, it felt like spiritual to me, like religious. It's so much more than just an agreement. It's like, oh, we're going to be in business. There's all that other stuff that goes with it. So I thought the organ seeping in throughout the score, when the importance of that Unholy Alliance gets more and more, but also how it starts falling apart. And then obviously on top of that, when the movie unravels, we see Johnny Depp in church. So I thought just throwing in the organ by the time he sits in church is like, oh, that's cheesy. So the organ needed to be part of the score ever so gradually throughout the film. So once we get to that point when he sits in church and he overthinks what's happening, that organ has now deserved the right to be there in its full ornation.
Talk a little bit about Scott Cooper's role as you were sort of figuring all this out and creating all this. What did you involve him? Did he have a lot of feedback? Would he come over and listen to what you had done?
Oh yeah. He's very involved, and together with his picture editor David Rosenblum, we had really interesting conversations. Why these characters are what they are, where they come from. Sometimes I would have completely overlooked the fact that I would connect 2-3 scenes together, and then Scott would say, no, you can't do that. This is like 5 years later. And I would completely have missed that, funny enough. And so there are a lot of these things where you have really interesting conversations. And Scott has impeccable knowledge of music. And at a certain point, the last 2 weeks of our process, he was here every day, and he would sit on the couch in the studio, and I would finish the writing on the cues, and I would say, well, what do you think, Scott? And then he would listen to it, and then he would take it in, and then he would say, yeah, this is it. Or he would say, oh, I'm still wondering if we need to change something. Let's take a break. And then we would sit outside, drink a coffee, and then come back in, and then we would play it again. And it was like, I would hear it through his ears. And I was like, man, you're right, we need to change that. And then he would say, right? And then, yeah. And then, so we would change things. So the last 2 weeks was like, literally every day he was here between, usually between 10 and 2 or 10 and 4. Wow. So I really like working, that close with the director, because that's when you learn to understand what movie he wants to make. And my role in this process is 100% to support his view what this movie needs to be.
You have said that you wanted to give Black Mass a score that was a little left of center. Yes. What did you mean by that? And how does that impact the picture generally?
I come from the alternative electronic music world, and I always loved music that is like off-center. And with off-center, I mean center is what you hear on the radio every day. Center in film scoring might be the average action score film or the action drama that you see, whether it's instrumentation or harmonic or melodic choices. And I really like to position myself a little more on the alternative side of things, also taking a risk that I might not be the composer for every movie, for every director, for every studio, but for me it's an interesting challenge to start there. And sometimes you just move up to the middle because it is what it is, it's teamwork, so you play as a team player. But if you ask me what do you love the most, is to see movies that are great with great characters and great storytelling, but then if the music also makes you uneasy or the sound is really unusual that you not quite have heard it like that before, I like that approach, and I've made many mistakes on that too. You know, also in my artist career, where you try something, it's like, well, Tom, that was a great idea, but that didn't quite work out, did it? You know, and that's why, you know, you constantly have feedback from your director and your picture editor and the producers who look at it and it's like, that's interesting, but I think on that scene you're going too far. I think we need to tone it down a little bit. And it's like, okay, you know, and then you tone it down a little bit.
And along those lines, this is a pretty dark movie. Was there concern that the music that you were bringing might make it even darker or somehow almost off-putting in a way, because there's a lot of violence in this movie too?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions, and I had a lot of thinking to do when I started on that long-form piece of music before I even got hired to score the film. It's like, okay, let's not put a hat on a hat, but still there's room for darkness, and there's room for uneasiness, but especially there's room for emotion. So the trick was, the people that start off the film is not a great group of people, you know, to begin with. So how do we travel? What is the music arc and what is our emotional arc of a movie that's 2 hours long, where eventually we need to like some of these characters, and eventually we cannot think of Bulger as a cool dude till the end of the movie. We just can't. So we have to find a way, not only in storytelling and acting and the brilliant editing that they've done in the picture, but also musically, we have to separate eventually Bulger from the pack. I mean, he goes to heights that are beyond, and then there's the group of criminals left that will eventually rat him out, and then there's the FBI that want to do good, but you know they mess it up terribly. So there's all these people, and then these innocent bystanders, like well, not completely innocent. You know, even the old lady that sees Bulger, it's like, it's so good to have you back in the neighborhood. Why is it good to have that character back in the neighborhood? So all these people, everybody in this movie has like some fault or something wrong about them. So everybody is even Connolly's wife, even the girlfriend of Bulger, she knew what was going on. And so all these people are not a great group of people to begin with, but still we need to feel empathy and sympathy to some of these characters throughout.
Yeah, they need to be portrayed as human beings.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. For a long time, we've thought of you as Junkie XL, a very much in-demand producer and performer. But in recent years, your character has been, your career has been more moving into film. Can you talk about your transition from one very different genre of music making into another one?
Yes. Well, for me, it's all music to begin with. But we get to this important point. It's like I have my. I started in the late '80s as an industrial artist, and then in the '90s it became more dance music, and I've done that for many years. And the end of the 90s, I saw a couple of movies that had licensed music in there from my albums. And I would see these movies and I would be, that's really interesting how my music works to picture. And that sparked the interest. And I did a couple of things on some movies here. And my artist career was still going, with my peak in 2002 when I had a #1 hit with A Little Less Conversation, the remix I did of an Elvis song. And around that time, I was coming a lot to LA, and I had a lot of contact with Jason Bentley, who is the now music director at KCRW, and he became a good friend. And he basically said, "Wouldn't it be something for you to move out here and just to get into this?" And I said, "Yeah, maybe." So I gave it a lot of thought, and eventually I decided, yeah, let's try it. So I went with a very small computer setup and just a guitar and a bass. I moved to LA, and I had a very small studio, just 8 by 8 feet, and I set up shop there, and I started meeting all these people, and I met composers, and this is 2003, and I figured out pretty quickly, it's like, wait, this is a craft, this is an art, to get this down. So my expectations to move to LA and to become a film composer within 2 months or 3 months, I threw that out of the window. It's like, no. The only way, if at all, I can make this is to start right at the bottom. So I started assisting Harry Gregson Williams. I assisted on one movie, Klaus Badelt. I started working with up-and-coming alternative directors in Holland and some other European countries to help them make a film and do the score for it. And we're all like trying to figure out, okay, so how does this work? You know, just a new director, and it was an incredibly intensive time period of learning and to learn what language does a director speak. A director doesn't say to you, just play that chord. No. They talk in colors. They talk in characters and colors, and it's a great type of language. And so I had to learn that. I had to see the dynamics in a room with everybody there. I had to see multiple tense moments and how people deal with that, and how to manage your own people, how to manage an orchestra and engineers. So there was so much to be learned, and it went on like that. And then I started doing successful films in Europe, and then I got in contact with Hans, and Hans and I worked. Hans Zimmer, sorry, and I worked with Hans on a few movies, and my role in these movies also grew in the collaboration with him. And we were just done with Man of Steel, where I worked a lot with him on that. And then Zack Schneider called me. He's like, "Hey, you want to do 300?" And I said, "Yeah," you know. And that was one was like, "Oh, you got 5 weeks. You think you can do it?" It's like, "Oh, it's going to be done, and it's going to be great." And so it was great to work with Zack on that. And then Divergent came, and then and basically after that it was Mad Max, and then it was Run All Night and Black Mass, and Batman Superman is coming out next year, and then later this year Point Break. So it's been quite a 2 years, but I really took the backseat of the bus to see it, you know, every step of the way, and just, you know, learn every small aspect, make mistakes, fall up, keep walking, fall down, keep walking. And there's all these new challenges that you need to learn, but I'm really happy that I did, because I'm really happy in this work environment, what film scoring is.
And this has been an especially big year for you, because Mad Max Fury Road was a very high-profile project, and now Black Mass, and you've just mentioned a couple of the others. Now, what's coming up for you? Point Break is one of them?
Yeah.
And what else?
And Batman vs. Superman, which I'm doing together with Hans. And that comes out in March next year.
So are you in the middle of these now, or
We're in the process of wrapping it up.
And what's next after that for you? Will you continue both careers, or are you strictly a film composer now?
No, I stopped pursuing my artist career like years ago. I've released an album in 2012, and that was more like that, and that's a very alternative left of center album. But I really wanted to make music with no attachment or whatsoever to a product, you know, and because that was the thing I had to learn too, you know, is that now I can say in retrospect that I have more creative music freedom on films than I did as an artist. And why is that? Because when you're as an artist, the room is the space in front of you and around you is so open that you're very scared to move to the left and then to the back and to the front. So what you're doing, or what I did, is I paved a way and said to myself, no, this is what Junkie XL is, just keep walking. This is the road that Junkie XL is. But what if I want to go to the left? No, Tom, don't go to the left. Just stay on the road, that's Junkie XL. Whereas as film composer, you constantly pull left, front, center, and then to the back. I mean, compare Mad Max and Black Mass to one another. It cannot be more opposite. And that triggers so much creative energy inside you that I feel now more at home in film scoring, way more alive, way more inspired to do things that I've never done before. And funny enough, people, and those are not necessarily the same people, but people find my film scoring work so much more original in its approach than my original artist work.
Is that a surprise to you?
I thought it was a surprise, but it surprised me too. I've always felt that, but you don't say something like that about yourself. You know, other people should say something like that.
It's very interesting because, you know, the film business is such a collaborative medium, and there are so many people that are often involved in music decisions. But it sounds to you like this is a great new playground.
It absolutely is. And you know, when you make that first initial piece of music, that's your selling point. You know, so I would never do a film and then the first time that the director and I meet up to play music is like, so I scored the opening of the film. You want to look at that? It's 2 minutes, and then it's like, oh yeah, that's great. But I mean, you have to see everything in context, and you cannot show a director a movie that's completely scored from beginning to end, because you know it's a process to get there together, not on your own. But what you can do is write a piece of music that's very lengthy, that goes through all these atmospheres, and give it to the director and say like, do you recognize your movie in this? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't, and that says a lot. And the cool thing is that I've been lucky with that way of working, because it makes me relive the movie stronger, because it's not on my screen. I'm not writing miniature sections to what is happening on picture. No, the picture is in my head, the storytelling is in my head, the characters are in my head, and I just move the picture out of the side, and I'm just thinking, you know, what this character is, and I write broad strokes of what is inside this character, not even looking at the scene. And the result of that is that you write a lot of pieces of music that never make it to the film, because you know that section might be part of his character, but there's simply not a scene where that is being acted out.
It's fascinating. And this clearly worked for Black Mass.
It worked for Black Mass, and it worked for Mad Max, and it worked for Ronald Knight, and it worked for 300.
It's a way of finding a big picture,
yeah,
and that you can draw bits and pieces from later.
Yes, yes. And sometimes you also have these remarkable coincidences, because if you write a piece of music specifically for a scene, it's very, very hard that if you take that piece and you throw it on the other random scene, that it would work as well as it did there. But if you have 45 minutes of music and you look at a scene, you just slide the music over and it's like, oh, but this is great. Wow. And so all these coincidences started happening. Plus, you also then can tap in on 2 or 3 other potential very powerful forces for you as a composer. One is the picture editor, one is the director, obviously, and one is the music editor. So you have laid your first egg, and it's a little scary, but you pass it over to these guys, and it's like, okay, I did this, but what do you guys think? And then Scott is saying like, oh, that section there and there, oh, I was wondering, could we use that for this and this scene? And I would be like, wow, interesting. I would never think of that, you know. Or the music editor would take a piece of music and he said, hey, I did something for the ending. You want to check this out? It really worked. And then he plays me something. It's like, oh, I would never thought to use this thing. And so you get this really interesting conversation, and that's where the real collaboration begins.
It sounds like that you have a real enthusiasm for this field. That
it's fantastic. You know, I feel like a kid in a candy store. You know, and I've also been very blessed with the collaborations that I've had so far with different directors and with different studios. It's just really nice to work with. I mean, all these people on that level, they're all so smart. They're all so creative. And there's so many horror stories about how things are being made in Hollywood. I haven't experienced it really like that firsthand. And I think also it's probably exaggerated too by a lot of people, because dramatic elements are more interesting than, you know, great collaborations, you know.
car seat still smelling like 10 keys. You couldn't stop me if you tried, cause the devil is a lie. The devil is a lie. Come the truth. The devil is a lie. The devil is a lie. Come alive. The devil is a lie.
Jimmy, when did you get out of Alcatraz?
Oh, that's nearly 10 years ago.
Well, it's wonderful to have you back in the neighborhood, son.